Here's a question for you. What do you get when you get 38 years of experience fighting the federal government and beating them in court, including big cases against administrations like the FDA, and you get a passion from someone who has seen court orders been ignored by the federal government over and over, and you see someone who wants to make a change in the country for good and decides to run and try to take on a very powerful Democrat incumbent U.S. Senator? Well, the answer is you get Jonathan Emord, and today I talk with him. Stick around and buckle up, because this is Fight and Revive with Adam Boyer.
America is no longer one nation under God. Are you ready to fight for revival? Well, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Fight and Revive with Adam
Boyer. So next, I'd like to ask a couple questions about the issue of abortion, which is an issue that a lot of people, myself included, even to some extent, find tricky politically and maybe even morally. First, just kind of an all-encompassing question. Under what circumstances, if any, should abortion be legally permissible, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, let me just say this. Under the federal Constitution, there is no right to abortion. There's no jurisdiction over abortion. Abortion, under the founders' concept, was a local issue. It was a health and safety issue. It was meant to be dealt with by the states and the localities, not by the federal government. So there's no basis for a Roe v. Wade. There's no basis. They got it right in Dobbs. There is no foundation under the Constitution for a federal role in abortion. All right, having said that, and I mean both ways, whether you were to ban all abortions or whether you would allow all abortions, there's no federal power that gives jurisdiction over the federal government, and that's a good thing. It needs to be resolved by the states. Now, having said that, while it's a state power, what is my personal view? My personal view is that abortion is a crime against humanity. It's a sacrifice of human life. Now, having said that, we have to understand this. In instances where a woman wishes for convenience or economic necessity to abort a child, that is an absolute horror, ought not be allowed by the states, in my view. In addition, in a situation where someone is in a pickle, the classic thing that they present you with is an incest example where, say, a father raped his daughter, right? Horrific. And she's impregnated, and so she's going to have a baby. And the baby would be all healthy under this factual scenario, let's assume. But nonetheless, it's the product of a horrific sin and a horrible thing, which is an incestuous assault or rape by the father. Well, the liberal argument is this is a tragedy, that you cannot require that child to deliver that baby. And let's say that the delivery can be accomplished without sacrificing the life of the mother. We'll get to that in a second. But in other words, could be a healthy child and the mother would survive and would not be injured. All right. In that situation, if you allow abortion, you are victimizing an innocent child because of the circumstance, horrific as it is. Okay, so in the instance of incest, we gave the example of a father raping a daughter, and let's say the daughter is 13 or 14 and is going to have a baby. Let's say in this circumstance the baby would be healthy at birth and the mother would not die. But in that situation, it is compounding the horror and the sin to abort the baby. So you just added death, murder, to an offense which is rape and incest. So there's no winning in this situation, right? This is a horrible tragedy. But what you don't want to do is make it worse. And let me tell you this. So you have a young girl beneath the age of majority and consent who has been raped, and you add to that the psychological trauma, never spoken of by those who are radical pro-abortion people, the psychological trauma that that young girl will carry for the rest of her life if she aborts that otherwise healthy baby. And what they don't talk about is the reality that there are solutions to this problem that don't involve requiring that 13-year-old girl assume an adult posture and financially support the baby when they can't even legally be employed. And that is adoption. And just as I think that the law cannot condone the death of that baby, and society cannot accept that, and it is radically at odds with all morality, I also think that we have an obligation to expand adoption services and remove the impediments to it so that Americans, over 110,000 of which, who want to adopt but cannot presently do so because of the cost of adoption in this country and the regulatory constraints, and so they go overseas, they ought to be adopting American children. And every woman, every girl who is in a situation where they don't want a child should be able to have that child be adopted by someone who does. Now, in the situation where the life of the mother is at stake and a determination would have to be where the reality is, and let's just assume this to be fact, that either the baby can be born alive or the mother will die, or the mother will live and the baby will die. Well, you know what? That is a moral dilemma that is profound and extremely susceptible to individual evaluation of religion and so on. In that situation, I do not believe the state can compel the mother to give birth and risk death, because the state should not be in that position. It is an act that is best left to the individuals who have that tragedy and to God and to their prayers and to their solutions. And that's what I think on that. You see, unlike politicians, I'm not a politician. I am just like everybody else. I've spent my whole career working hard and earning a living, and I come into this without political speech. That is to say, I don't mouth platitudes. I deal with the actual facts. So what am I? I am a person who believes in life. I am pro-life. I personally believe in that. What am I as a federal candidate? I am a candidate who does not believe that the federal government under the Constitution created by our founding fathers has any jurisdiction whatsoever over abortion. They never addressed abortion in the constitutional debates. They knew it existed. They didn't address it as a power of the federal government, and it would have been outrageous if they did, because it would have deviated from their presumption for dual federalism, a system of both states and the federal government, that the federal government would have some role in health and safety. They meant that to be left to the states. So as a federal candidate, my position is there is no power over this question on the federal level. It has to be decided by the states. And I agree with Dobbs.
I think that's a tricky question, too, because those who are on the side of the federal government getting involved in abortion in terms of banning it will say that, first of all, they'll say at the time, while the founders didn't specifically address it at the time, all 13 original states had laws against abortion, and so the founders didn't find it necessary. So they'll say it's a gray matter area in the Constitution, which then those who would not want the federal government getting involved would say, well, then the federal government doesn't have any power. Where I think those who do want it banned would probably combat it with, well, the federal government right now does almost everything they do, they have no power to do, and as long as we're going to use the general welfare clause so loosely, we'll use it for this as well. So I think that's a potential legal situation we could find ourselves in at some point if we ever get real conservatives in the House as well, the House and Senate, that want to pass something like this. But what do you think about that? Because I think that could be a tricky legal situation. Obviously, I don't come from a legal background.
Remember that our Constitution is a constitution of limited powers. It is a constitution of delegated power. So under the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution, if rights or powers are not specified, they are reserved to the people and the states. So they understood abortion to exist. And in some states, some of the colonies that were soon to be states, even then, abortion was allowed. It was practiced. Now, the degree of liberality or acceptance of it varied. But the Founding Fathers had a full understanding that it was dealt with by the states. As you're pointing out, it was not lawful in the states, even though in some states it was practiced. But the point is, they did not usurp that power. And because we rent the Constitution, that is, we tear it up, we hurt it, when we unilaterally interpret it in a way in which it is contrary to its plain and intended meaning, if you create a power that does not exist, as would happen if you were to have a national ban, then you lay a precedent which cannot be controlled. And that is that the government may in other areas create new powers upon comparable arguments of the need for it. So, if you want a national government ban on abortion instead of fighting it state by state, then you have to seek a constitutional amendment. And that would be through Article 5. And that is as George Washington told us, and this is something people should bear in mind, because this is from one of the principal Founding Fathers. He said, "Let there be no change," meaning change in the Constitution, "let there be no change by usurpation. For though in one instance it may be an instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. We have to stand for the rule of law. We have to uphold the Constitution as written. We have to interpret the Constitution as it was intended to be interpreted. If we violate those principles, we cannot then take issue with the liberals who argue, you know what, under Roe v. Wade, they were right. There's a penumbra under various parts of the Bill of Rights that gives rise to a personal right of privacy. And that right of privacy is a woman's right, and she may abort. Well, that didn't exist, and the court was right. There is no such thing. The Constitution doesn't have it, and to declare it a penumbra or an assembly of rights derived from various amendments on the assumption that that somehow speaks to it is just as wrong as saying that there is, as it was actually the case there, that there is a power that hasn't been given. If it's the Constitution is written because it is an express statement. It was not the writing of it. The reason why they have a written Constitution instead of being like England, where there's an unwritten Constitution, the reason why they chose a written Constitution consistent with John Locke's second treatise on government and the call for defense of the rights of man from the rights revolution and the Enlightenment era, the reason why we have a written Constitution is to ensure that we do not have an assumption of power beyond what was written. There's the non-delegation doctrine in the Constitution, and that means that powers not delegated to the government of the United States may not be assumed by the government of the United States. And the General Welfare Clause was understood by the Founding Fathers not as a provision for unlimited power, but rather as a provision to say that the existing constitutional provisions would be interpreted in a way that would enable those things necessary to achieve the ends in the Constitution could be allowed to achieve it, not that new powers would be given. That would utterly defeat the Fifth Amendment. To allow Constitution to be modified or changed or new powers to be assumed that were not adopted by an amendment.
You mentioned Article 5 of the Constitution. I'm very glad you did. We're up against the clock here a little bit, so I'm going to not deviate too much from the last couple questions I have here, but I do want to just say real quick, Article 5, for those who may not know, allows two ways of the Constitution being amended. Either Congress can propose amendments, obviously, or the states can petition Congress. It's 2/3 of the states need to send, would have to agree to a petition to Congress, which basically has the same wording in every legislature that it's passed in. and they could petition Congress to call a convention to propose amendments to the Constitution. So this specifically, we were talking about that in terms of abortion. Now this convention of states idea that's been going around for the past few years now has, I think, 19 states signed on to it. Couldn't do that to abortion, couldn't propose anything on the idea of abortion because in all the states where it's already passed, the petition reads basically the same, in that the idea is to impose term limits in federal overreach and restore balanced budget. So this one couldn't specifically deal with abortion, but that's the goal of it. So just real quick, are you a supporter, because I know you mentioned it, so are you supportive of the Convention of States movement?
No, and the reason why I'm not is this. So it certainly is a constitutional power, and I don't want to say it's not. I do believe that there may come a time when there is a necessity for it. However, I believe presently we have a constitution. We understand what it means. I think it's nearly perfect in the sense that I think if, as originally understood, it were interpreted, it would provide really a very strong, powerful defense of individual liberty. And I believe it would be, as Alexander Hamilton referred to it, as really very nearly the most perfect institution for government that exists. We had at the time of the Constitutional Convention what Thomas Jefferson referred to as a cordial relationship among those who adopted it. He said we are all Whigs, cordial in our sentiments, when he referred to the Constitutional Convention. Not that they didn't argue, but that they were all of one mind in the sense that they were committed to individual liberty, they were opposed to tyranny, and they did not want a government of unlimited power. That's not the environment we live in today. Most of those people who are in the states, in urban jurisdictions, are either advocates of unlimited government or outright communists, frankly. And they would be participants in a convention. And I'm afraid that in a convention, we would not have that unanimity of love of liberty and fear of despotism and tyranny that animated our founding fathers to create such an extraordinary document. So if you open up a general convention, then the problem would be that there would likely be a majority of those present who would favor modifications that would be profound, such as the general consensus in the Democrat Party today, that which is a majority party in number, that there ought to be a change in the First Amendment so that there is greater government censorship, or what they call elimination of misinformation in the market and in speech. They would also favor the advancement of people predicated upon race, so they would favor constitutional requirements for quotas and so forth, all of which are anathema to freedom and to individual liberty, and are positions that favor socialism. They would be in favor of universal mandatory national health insurance. They would be in favor of eliminating all fossil fuels by constitutional requirement, in favor of Chinese-made windmills and so on. The point is, if you wanted Bernie Sanders' socialist agenda for America to be adopted, you would have a much easier time doing it through a constitutional convention under the current politics than you would through Congress, even though it has largely been adopted by the president in an unconstitutional way. That's my fear. I believe in individual amendments. I do believe in a limited term limits amendment. I've endorsed that. But also, here's the practical reality. There will be no constitutional convention. The reason is that you couldn't get, under present circumstances, a majority of the states to agree to it.
Yeah, I would disagree a little bit in terms of the danger of it, because of the way the current proposal and the petition passed by the various states is worded to where, and by the letter of the law, they can't just add in an amendment here, to ban guns or whatever willy nilly. But let
me just say this on that point, just for a moment, if I may. So remember that the original Constitutional Convention, which is the kind of constitutional convention that is the only precedent for what is meant in the Constitution, a constitutional convention, Convention of the States. That was designed to amend the Articles of Confederation, right? It was purposefully the states' authorizations to the delegates bound them to amend the Articles of Confederation. Yet the amendments, which were meant to be not to completely scrap the Articles and replace it with a new Constitution, it was the consensus of those who attended the Constitutional Convention that mere amending of the Articles was insufficient, and that they had to create a new organization of government. Well, that is the problem, because even though the states may wish to bind by law those delegates who attend to achieve a specific end, the precedent for a constitutional convention is that an entire form of government can be replaced. That's the problem. I mean, who's to constrain the delegates when they are in this, when they've been given legal authorization to act, and they come out of it with this entirely new government? It's too extraordinary a power to exercise. Having said that, if we were in a situation where the communist Chinese controlled the United States government, which, they've infiltrated a lot of it, and if they were to come to control it, and they were to just completely destroy the Constitution of the United States, we would be in that position which is defined by the Declaration of Independence, which is when there is no possibility of amendment to achieve the ends of protecting the government. What do you do then? And that's where the right of revolution arises, right? And in such a circumstance, then, even revisiting and adopting or following or recognizing anew the Constitution of 1787 as amended, you might still need a constitutional convention to afford whatever new power was required to achieve the resurrection of the old Constitution. So there might be, at some point in history, a need for that. And perhaps they were very wise. Perhaps that was why that element was allowed. But absent those circumstances, when there is again this unanimity of opinion in favor of liberty, we are in very precarious grounds when we want one, when a significant number of the states would be happy to have a convention to achieve ends that are opposite the defense of individual liberty.
You certainly bring up a valid point, and there's a lot more we could say on the issue, but I am going to move on. Perhaps that's something we could talk about another time. So as we begin to wrap up here with our last topic, I would like to touch on foreign policy. Obviously, the U.S. Senate is not directly involved in most foreign policy decisions, but two of the big areas they are involved in theory anyway, is A, in voting to declare war, and B, voting for funding. I want to get to Israel in just a minute, but first I'd like to touch on Ukraine. Most reports show that the U.S. has already sent over $75 billion now to Ukraine, with no clear objective or end to their war, and really our war, with Russia in sight. So if you're elected to the Senate, will you vote for additional funding to Ukraine, and if so, why?
I will not, and the reason why is twofold. First of all, we have, as you point out, given nearly $100 billion to Ukraine with virtually no strings attached. In fact, there's been an enormous amount of siphoning of money off into illicit actions and to individuals who are profiting from it. But also, it's just insane. There's no end in sight. There's no strategy involved that makes sense. It is not in our national interest to do this. We're trying to defend Ukraine's borders at the same time that we have open borders here, and we have this dire need for investing in our own protection. But be that as it may, it's not giving us any clear end to this problem when right staring us in the face is an answer, but it's totally unacceptable to the Biden administration. And that answer, far more effective than just dumping tens of billions of dollars into the Ukraine indefinitely, at a time when we have a $33 trillion national debt, when we have a $2 trillion deficit spending in the coming year, and when that's going to go on and rise over time, which is ruinous to our own economy. They're doing this. And what they ought to do instead is simple, and this would solve the entire problem. Russia depends about 98% for its revenue on the sale of oil and gas. It has to be an oil and gas exporter for its own government to function, for its military to be financed. Rather than dumping money on the opposite side of this equation, why not, without spending money, remove all the regulations that are killing the fossil fuel industry so that we can become energy independent, become an energy exporter, and focus our policy on creating liquefied natural gas depots all throughout Europe and replacing Russia as the source of fuel for Europe. Not only do we enrich the United States and expand our domestic markets in the process, but we also take away the resources that Russia needs to finance its war. That's a much better solution.
Not only would we become would we become an exporter of oil and drive gas prices and everything else way down here at home. President Trump pointed out a few years ago when he was president, I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff. I'm actually not for him in the primary as my first choice. But one of the things he said that was dead right was he told Germany that if you go through with this climate change stuff, I'm paraphrasing here, of course, if you go through with this climate change stuff, you're going to be dependent on Russia for your oil, and you're going to be completely dependent on some country. Well, the U.S. isn't supplying Germany or those European countries now with oil, and they're completely dependent on Russia. So to an extent, they're crippled as well. The U.S. could fix that, and you're exactly right. So much this could be fixed if we stopped buying oil from Russia and started supplying it to those European countries. Now, moving into another war, obviously, the one that's in the news more right now, most people are far more supportive of Israel than they are of Ukraine, certainly on the right. Senator Lindsey Graham has recently, in reference to Iran, said that, quote, "If you escalate the war, we're coming for you." He's called for bombing of Iran's oil centers and generally been extremely supportive of an escalation of the war and direct U.S. involvement therein. U.S. involvement in any way other than perhaps financial and equipment support, and certainly if we were to put troops on the ground in Israel, could absolutely trigger a world war. What's your position on the whole situation in Israel? I know that's kind of an all-encompassing question, but what's your position on it?
I think that Israel is the strongest ally of the United States and the greatest barrier to absolute unremitting attacks by terrorists against the United States. Bad as they are now, if Israel didn't exist, they'd be so much worse. So Israel is a vital ally of the United States. Having said that, again, we should pursue our own self-interests, and when it comes to foreign policy, an America First policy needs to be in place across the board. We should not be in the business of going to war like Lindsey Graham. He's just absolute hawk. Every time there's an opportunity, a foreign power takes one action, and he wants us to go to war. We can be smarter than that. We don't have to put our lives on the line. We don't have to draw ourselves into what might manifest itself into a massive pit into which we pour human beings and do nothing for our own national interest. Israel's interest is in survival. We have an interest in Israel's survival. Israel has a direct interest in eliminating Iran. Iran has financed its enemies, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist organizations, and is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Israel is very capable of destroying Iran. Israel has interdicted their nuclear power or their nuclear weapons program time and again with its own intelligence services and with its own, the Mossad and its various other clandestine operators, and it has been very effective. I don't have any doubt that Israel can both survive and can expand its power and can use that power against Iran or anyone else. It is their fight. It is their action. We have to stop pursuing the policies that cause us to get into everyone's fight, because it's a horrible thing that there is this horrendous situation happening there and elsewhere in the world. We can do smart things. We can give them aid. We can give them assistance specifically for bolstering their ability to fight against terrorism, because we ourselves have to fight against those same terrorists. But, and I include within that definition Iran, which is a state sponsor of terrorism, just as North Korea is. But in this situation, not 98% of the money and armamentation and training and the trigger point, most likely for all of this, and the planning over a year in advance, no doubt, was all Iranian. And for Israel, that means that Israel has been attacked. Israel should respond. We as an ally should help Israel. But no way should we go and bomb Tehran and send troops on the ground into Iran. Absolutely not. Now, if Iran is bold enough to strike the United States, it's another issue, and we need to take a look at it. Furthermore, I don't think that this is appropriately Lindsey Graham's province. Again, the Constitution matters and should be controlling. And as a senator, he can give advice and consent, and he can have a role to play in treaties, but he ought not be trying to micromanage how we would intervene if we did intervene and whether we should intervene. He really ought to just stay in his lane, I think.
I completely agree, and I think that's some advice Senator Graham could heed. Mr. Emord, thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you on the show. Before I let you go, where can viewers and listeners go to find out more and maybe support your campaign?
Emord4va.com, and boy, oh boy, we could sure use financial support for the campaign. They can donate there, and if they want to, this was very important, they can volunteer to support the campaign. We've had good fortune. We have large numbers of volunteers across the state, and I'm very grateful for everyone's hospitality in receiving us and endorsing us and supporting us. I do believe we're in the front-runner position in the race, and I think that's reflected not only in the donations but also in the very real grassroots support that we've been shown all across. So I think we're in a good position. I also think that Tim Kaine is in a very bad position. This is another important point. I have been a litigator for 38 years. I am a federal litigator who has argued against what really is the best and the brightest that the Justice Department has to offer, and I've defeated them even before judges who you cannot characterize as conservative. So my point is, I believe I can persuade, and I think I can do a good job of that. I think I can also attack. And I think what we need to defeat Tim Kaine is not just someone who rightfully raises the flag and says they honor it, which I do, but someone who can actually attack him for being really a alter ego of Joe Biden, of favoring every trillion-dollar-plus spending bill that has come down the pike, regardless of its inflationary impact, of being so far left that he gets Americans for the Socialist Americans for Democratic Action, I guess, vote of 100% voting record. The Socialists have identified him as completely in line with their objectives, and yet when he talks to Virginia audiences, he tries to characterize himself as a moderate. I think we know the truth, but I'd like to show that, and I'd like to argue against him and debate him, and I think I could do a real good job of both attacking his positions and also raising the flag and standing for the Constitution and explaining why this is what's not being done, explaining why what he's doing is a violation of our rights and our Constitution.
Yes, I absolutely agree, and I haven't really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you again, Mr. Emord. You're right that we need donations too, even if people haven't decided who they want to support in the primary, which obviously I encourage people to support you, and certainly when we get to the general election and it's you, or if it's not you, but certainly if it is, versus Tim Kaine, Democrats always put their money where their mouth is, Republicans often do not. Tim Kaine has a big fundraising advantage. Democrats always out-fundraise Republicans in Virginia, so I highly encourage you to go to emordforvirginia.com, that's EMORDFORVA.com, and support his campaign. So thank you again for coming on, sir. You're welcome back anytime.
You bet, Adam, and it's been a real pleasure, and I really appreciate how well you've done with this interview. You're a talented man.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. More time in case y'all didn't catch that, the website was Emord, EMORD 4VA.com. I encourage you to support Jonathan, and even if you don't support him in the primary, which I'll be honest, I haven't even made up my mind yet. I think I'm certainly going to support him, but maybe another candidate could come along and rock my world in the primary, although I doubt it because this is Virginia politics. And I think Jonathan's a really great guy, so I encourage you to support him. And as I said, once we get to the general election, throw your support behind him. Volunteer is such a huge part of campaigns. Do that. Volunteer, donate. Republicans need to put their money where their mouth is. Go to the website. Do whatever you can. Very impressive guy. And I hope you enjoyed my talk with Jonathan Emord. I'm getting to see him in person very soon, and I hope to have a great conversation with him in person. Hopefully we can have him back on the show in the future. Thank you for watching, folks. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and help this video reach more people by liking it and sharing it on your social media or with someone you may know who might like it as well. This is Fight and Revive with Adam Boyer. I'm out of here. Thanks for watching.